How to quit cars. I find this article to be too high-minded. Most Americans don't own cars or support car-friendly policies, due to some notion of car equals freedom or some other culture wars nonsense. Americans own cars because most of them live in single-family houses on large plots of land, and that doesn't make public transit for daily commuting a realistic possibility. In Paris, car ownership is very low, maybe 1/3 of adults. But in rural France, the car ownership rate is easily 95%, plus I haven't seen a single developed area in the world that has violated the rule that low density equals high car ownership, and vice versa. The other rule that I have never seen violated is that the large majority of middle and upper income people do not want to live near low income people, due to crime or other reasons. In Europe, poor people live in the suburbs, so the middle income live in the city with high density housing. In the US and some other places, South Asia, low-income people live near the business center, so the middle income live in low-density housing in the suburbs. These are for historical reasons and cannot be easily changed.
America actually has a huge public transportation system servicing most homes in the US. It's the bus system for public schools. Running local loops to pick people up in moderately high-density neighborhoods, with 1 acre per house or less every half hour or so, is actually pretty easy. Just read up on the old trolley networks before cars took off. The real reason Americans own cars is because we're rich enough to afford a more expensive and more convenient system. Public transit at scale is surprisingly cheap when compared to all the costs associated with car stuff, tens of thousands of people in even a fairly small community.
That's not quite true. The simple reason Americans drive cars is because it's impossible to live without one. I spent a week in Austin, and the difference between its suburban layout and that of any European city is stark. It's really hard for someone who hasn't lived it to really understand what it means to be able to walk to the shop. Then compare to when that's not physically possible.
It's odd to me that these anti-car polemics never talk about why Americans don't want to ride public transit, while people in most other countries have zero issues adopting it wholesale. Instead, they just make it into a simplistic, moralistic crusade about how the suburban car owners are evil people, told from the perspective of a righteous city dweller. Here's a better theory. Because American public transit is, when compared with the alternatives, not safe, not clean, and not convenient. Take LA, probably the most car-dependent big city in America. Riding the bus or subway in LA is not an enjoyable experience. Nor is it enjoyable to walk around the areas where the stops are. If I were trying to get more people to use public transit, I'd start by making the stations and buses subways beautiful, clean, safe places that are just nice urban places to hang out in. There's no need to make it a moral crusade. Just offer a better product, and more people will use it.
I've been railing against cars in the US for years and years. The thing is that today, most people in the US under the age of 60 grew up in cars, usually in a suburban environment. And it's actually impossible for them to imagine what life without a car might even look like. It's like trying to describe a color. If we can't even visualize an alternative, how are we supposed to achieve the alternative? Only by traveling to places that were developed before cars took a chokehold on the world can people realize how nice it is to live without them absolutely everywhere. Many Americans get a taste of that when they vacation to Europe. They often choose to leave their suburb and spend their 2 weeks in urban environments like Barcelona, London, Munich, Paris, Rome, etc., that were built for people and not cars, because it's so pleasant to live like that, and because letting cities develop for people first leads to cities that people actually want to be in, with car-free streets, plazas, promenades, etc. Yes, today those places are also full of cars. But unlike American cities, their skeletons are people first, and cars are the invasive element. It could be argued that so many problems of American life, weight gain, loneliness, fracturing of the social fabric, stem from how we've isolated ourselves in unwalkable suburbs, where there's no spontaneous social interaction because everyone's always in a car, and where our only exercise is the walk from the parking lot to our desk. What's depressing is visiting developing countries and seeing them start to ape the worst of American car life. Places like Colombia, which I visit often, are building shopping malls, big box stores, parking lots, suburbs, and freeways, while after almost 100 years of that type of car-first development in America, we're only just starting to realize that actually it might not be that great.
What's depressing is visiting developing countries and seeing them start to ape the worst of American car life. What a patronizing take. Cars are freedom. You can go where you like, when you like, with whom you like, and you can do it without dealing with crowded, noisy, sometimes dangerous buses, trams, subways. It's as true in the developing world as it is here. As for such things happening in Colombia, it turns out that Colombians like the same things as Americans. They just previously didn't have the money to afford them. Like, what's the alternative? Developing economies go from grinding poverty to bicycle-centric urban planning utopia by top-down fiat. How do you propose to stop Colombians from voting with their wallets when they choose to eat at chain restaurants, shop at big box stores, and then take the freeway back to their air-conditioned square FT houses in the suburbs? Sorry, Mr. Middle-class Colombian, I know you really like McDonald's, but trust us, we're saving you from your own bad choices.
As someone who's lived in Manhattan, it's not all a panacea you make it out to be. Taking the subway is a pain in the butt. If you try to come home when it's after 11 p.m., you get to wait 30+ min for a train. When you want to get the groceries, you have to somehow shuffle all that stuff home, either with a cart or just have your hands suffer in the cold, and then have a 4-story walk-up. Sure, it's charming, but living there takes some real grit. By the way, those places are all expensive comparatively.
I dunno. I've been to all of those European cities, and they were nice to visit for a week as a tourist, but the density along with everything that goes with it, noise, smells, crowds, etc., were always a reminder that I only want to be there on a brief visit. I'm my suburban city. I simply hop in my vehicle and can be anywhere I want in 15 minutes.
A well-designed city makes most errands faster on foot than in a car. Even when cars are prioritized, traffic makes even the smallest errands a problem eventually. Roads simply don't scale. And cars are by far the loudest thing about cities at almost all times. They make the very air hostile with pollution and heat. And, worst of all, I simply hop in my vehicle and can be anywhere I want in 15 minutes. You do this at the direct expense of everyone else in your city. You make the streets unwalkable and the city unlivable. You are insulated from the sounds and dangers that you are creating around you. I'm just using you as an example. I don't actually blame you for taking the only option you've been given.
Car-centric design makes things unwalkable. Other models make things undrivable. It's a competition.
The issue of quieting cars is nowadays far from just a matter of values, as the article seems to be implying. Cars are by now a hard-to-reverse environmental and urban planning disaster across the world. We are stuck with them. As a mode of transport, it has grown uncontrollably at the expense of all others, except the airplane, and practically everything has been shaped to accommodate it. Reversing that development, limiting car traffic to where it's really needed, is like trying to perform a complete heart and arteries transplant on a living person. Even if there was a will, which there is not, it is not clear if there is a way. In the best scenario, it will be an excruciatingly long transformation, 50-year. As car-oriented cities, or city sections, get slowly deprecated and the car-free or car-light segments become more desirable, more livable.
It's not really remove cars' problem though. Cars are fine and are needed. You can't move anything big with tram or bike easily. It's make other forms of transport more viable for day-to-day stuff. You still need vans and trucks delivering stuff to people and businesses. Bus is far more flexible form of transport than tram. Just, if you need to wait ages for one, and there is no stop nearby, nobody will want to wait.
Even if there was a will, which there is not, it is not clear if there is a way. In Boston there's both a will and a way. I haven't owned a car for as long as I've lived here, and the bike lanes are so much better now than when I first arrived. Neighboring Cambridge now has laws on the books requiring bike lanes to be added any time that a road is rebuilt. The new light rail extension through Somerville added a bike path alongside most of its length, connecting the paths along the downtown Riverside to the Minuteman Bikeway that runs 15 miles out to Bedford. It can be done. But people have to organize and give a fuck.
I've purposefully chosen and paid the higher rent for an apartment that's on the greenbelt in my city and close to work, so that I can use my car less. As a couple we still own 2 cars, but really only use them to transport our dog to trailheads. The exercise pays dividends, and at just over 2 miles from work, it takes maybe 3 minutes longer getting to work than driving to a parking garage. I feel fortunate to make enough money to easily afford the rent, but it's insane that in most places you need a high-paying job to escape needing a car. Refugee and low-income housing here is clustered around major streets, like 6-lane one-way transport corridors. Unless they work downtown or close to a stop on one of the few bus lines that run frequently and reliably, they need cars. Usually the cheapest they can afford, which likely means they need to spend money. They don't have to get them passing emissions tests at registration time, deal with breakdowns, high insurance premiums, etc. It doesn't help that most of the planned transit improvements seemingly are focused on greenification of buses, rather than just getting more buses on the road to expand routes, make lines frequent enough to use for commuting, etc. My city did pass some new zoning codes, which heavily cut back on parking requirements. I'm excited to see how that slowly pans out. I expect more high-capacity parking structures to go up, fewer surface lots. People might need to walk further or explore other last-mile options. I have hope that will turn people's eyes towards non-vehicle transportation improvements.
I skimmed the article, and I feel like nothing really answers the question to how to quit cars, aside from pricing parking better. Personally, I'd love to be able to rely on cars less. They are kind of the epitome of tragedy of the commons. But as a lifelong suburbanite with 2 cars in a 2-person household, this is what I'd have to see to quit cars. Ability to get a vehicle on demand, say within 5-10 minutes, 24/7, 365 anywhere in upstate NY, from cities to boonies. That vehicle would need to allow me to transport large goods, bulky goods to an extent. Lumber 6, flammable solvents. Also needs to accommodate 2 medium dogs. I'd need dedicated bike lanes to the nearby shops and groceries before I could even attempt to use that as an option. Their store's only a few miles from me, but the roads to get there are treacherous. There's more, but those are the bare minimums, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
If people want to live in cities and want to have a car-free lifestyle, then more power to you. Cities are becoming increasingly unaffordable and increasingly violent. I think that we are past peak metro, and that the absolute refusal of many people to return to office work is going to result in an acceleration of outmigration from cities. This in turn will exacerbate other urban problems as the revenue base dries up and low-wage employees become ever more difficult to find in urban areas.
The fact that it takes 6 hours to get from Baltimore to Boston, when a faster train can cover the longer distance between Paris and Marseille in 4, does not move us to protest the obvious failure of ambition. By this logic, since planes can cover longer distances in shorter times than trains, should we quit trains in favor of planes?
When you factor in a couple hours of wading through security checkpoints, at least in the US, it flips the timescale again for the short-medium trips.